Hello everybody, my name is DC Rockwell and this is Automate All the Things. Tonight we have a special show for you. After our Thanksgiving break last week where we didn't do a show, we have Parham Doustdar on the show. He is a blind coder, professional programmer, who is going to talk to us about what it's like to code blind and what are the tools and what how do you overcome that kind of a thing in a craft that is primarily visual for most of us. So, very cool guest we have on here. He is coming to us from Iran, and it is, I think, 2 a.m. his time. So he's staying up late just to do this show for us, which is super awesome. All right, so let's get into it. Let me get you guys into the show. All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Hi.
Excellent. Awesome. Now, let me pull this up so everyone can see Elio. And all right. Awesome. So, Parham, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate that you're staying up late and doing this. It's really cool. So much for joining us. Sorry, go ahead. So anyway, just tell us a little bit about your background and tell us a bit about you. Like, what are how did you get started with coding? Were you born in Iran? Is that where you always grew up?
Yeah. So hi. It's great to be here. Thanks a lot for having me. I was born in Iran. I'm not currently in Iran though. I was born in Iran, and I grew up there for like 27 years. Last year, I moved to the Netherlands because I found the position with Booking.com, and that was what allowed me to move. Because otherwise, people just don't want us to mostly in their country. But like, so the point where my programming career kind of began was when I was 14. So at the time there were something called audio games. They were pretty trendy at the time. I think it was like 14 years ago or so. So the whole idea was you could build a game that was purely on audio, and it was using the stereo field to, like, for example, imagine that you have to, I don't know, let's take a very classic game. You are like on a side scroller, you're moving from left to right. What happens is you just hear objects on in your right ear. That like the objects that are in front of you. Some of them you have to dodge. Some of them you have to, like, I don't know, attack and stuff like that. So these games were mostly built with audio interfaces giving you cues to react. I really wanted to, like, I was really into games at the time. And the reality was that when you were looking at mainstream games, like games that were released on PlayStation at the time, they were not really accessible. So what happened was it just convinced me to try and write my own games so that I could play them, or like other people could also play them. And that actually got me into programming. I got a pretty considering it now, it was a pretty crappy book about programming in Visual Basic 6. And then I got started with that, which showed me the whole power of being able to create things, which kind of hooked me from the beginning. The especially for games is that you're actually creating a world from nothing, which was really really inspiring. I later on went to multi-user dungeon games. That's like MUDs, they call them.
Oh yeah,
they are.
We played Zork on here. We actually made a Twitch plays Zork, and so our chatters could actually go through and submit the submit the commands for it. They figured out how to hack
That's
our interface for that and break the game within like 15 minutes.
wow, that's pretty smart. Okay.
How old were you when you
Yes,
started getting into coding?
I was 14 at the time.
Cool.
So now I'm 27, but at the time I was like 14, and I think by the time I was dealing with MUDs, it was like 16. I was 16, 17. Um, but then there was also a lot of visualizing going on. So MUDs are textual, but what you're trying to create in the like in the player is a sense of the world. So you are describing the world to them as they would see it, um, which was very problematic for me, considering that I've never seen anything before. So this kind of introduced me to the fact that this profession was not all rainbows and unicorns, and being able to create things, and this is so cool and stuff like that. Um, which later on got me to like web development, because so I was playing around with PHP, for example, and I really liked that at the time, because it was much easier for me to interact with than Windows or Linux applications. And then I just stuck with it, because like I got a job when I was studying in university, and I just quit to get that job instead of studying, because I hated my studies. So
Gotcha.
so yeah, um, that was how it happened. And considering that studies in Iran are pretty inaccessible, in that like I didn't have any books to read from, and like there was a lot of problems going into university every day and stuff like that. So yeah, I was super glad that I had the opportunity to just quit and focus on working, as opposed to trying to study. But what the whole thing taught me is how to try and get around all the limitations in the world around you, in the sense that you're like honestly, we all the disabled people are living in a world which is not built with them in mind, which
Hmm.
is a pretty massive assumption once you acknowledge it to yourself, and try to think about how you can fill in the gaps, which you have to be very creative about.
Right.
So like that's kind of like the whole experience of programming plus university, and then like later on going to the whole job ecosystem, like where people were pretty clueless on how should they even approach me, which is not, I mean, like approaching me is not a whole ritual or anything. It's just that people are so worried about offending me, or saying the wrong thing, or like how does he even do it, how does he want to talk about things and stuff like that, that they find it really hard to interact with me without being worried all the time on saying the wrong thing.
Right.
So
So one of the big challenges that you've faced is actually how other people have treated you.
yeah, in and it's even worse in the Netherlands, or like I would imagine in the US, because of the whole political correctness thing that has been happening recently.
Yeah.
Um, where like I felt a lot like people, in an effort to be politically correct, they are paralyzed, and what should I even say? Okay, so let's get around the issue and not even talk to this person at all. So
Right.
so there is a lot of that happening as well.
What were some of the, I mean, other than working with other people, what are some of the specific challenges that you faced when you were trying to get into code? Like, obviously, not being able to see the screen is one of them, but were there other things? Were there like tools that you were using? How did you overcome them, and what were those challenges?
Yeah, mostly the challenges I was like facing at the time, and that I am facing every time I look for a new job, is to find a place where you don't have to do user interfaces. So that would be mostly like backend systems, like APIs, and mainly like deployments, tooling, all that stuff that I can do. But user interfaces, that's like HTML and CSS and all that stuff that I can't do. And mainly it is like uh, figuring out, okay, is this vague job description going to include user interface or work or not? And the thing is that like many, like especially when I was trying to find a job in the Netherlands or in Europe in general, is that many people, it's so the reality is that it is much cheaper if you pay someone to do the UI and the backend work all at once, instead of paying two people to one do the UI and one do the backend. Um, and that is one thing that I faced at some point, where I felt like the vacancies that where I was looking for are mostly full stack. So depending on the language you choose, or the ecosystem you're working in, then more like there might be a lot of full stack like there might be a lot of people looking for full stack developers, which is of course not going to work for me. Um, so finding a job I could do was one of the issues I was facing at different periods of time. Um, and then communicating what I can and cannot do to people is also another thing. So people in I was telling you about the whole uh, being politically correct thing. Um, People try to assume things so that they don't have to ask things, because asking things is harder. What happens is that now you have to go and find people's assumptions and slowly repair them, or like turn turn them into reality. Like, no, you, for example, how you assume that I can't work in a large team. That is not really much of, like, that's not really true. Um, I know that logically it makes sense to you with your with the way you put it now, but that's not true. And like stuff like that, where you finally feel like after 6 months you're like, so the thing they said they have been saying for 6 months is actually because of this base assumption.
Right.
um so there's a lot of soul searching, uh well, other people's souls.
how
And
do you how do you go into an interview, like when you're first applying? I would imagine you need to tell them you're blind like right away. And so how do you usually go about telling a potential employer that I can't do, UI stuff, but I can do everything else?
yeah, I've tried multiple strategies. What I learned in Iran, which is like the common knowledge, is don't tell people that you're blind, because they're gonna just rule you out in the very beginning. Um, which I didn't like. I mean, I would feel pretty weird if someone was hide. It felt like someone was hiding something from me. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
if you truly accept yourself for who you are, you don't like necessarily hide it. But at the same time, you don't try and say, "Hi, good morning. I'm blind. I wanted to apply for the job." That is also not like, I've tested that. That doesn't actually work. So what I've found to work is that I like any feature of a person. I don't make it too bold. I don't make it too small. It's not like I don't try and downplay it, but I don't also try and like mention it as soon as possible. So what happens mostly is that I send people, like, people usually find me on Stack Overflow or LinkedIn. They send me a job offer, and I'm like, okay, so great of you to reach out. I see some parts of this job description that might indicate that this is a very user interface centric role, because you said this and this and this. But as you probably might have seen in my LinkedIn profile, if you have read my articles and stuff like that, I am blind. So I'm assuming people already know, and using that to like tell them if they don't already know, which a lot of people respond to by saying, "Oh, oops." I didn't actually read your articles, but okay, yes, this is a very user interface centric role. See you. So there is that, but there's also a lot of people, like for example, that maybe want me to move or stuff like that. So I'm like, I just moved to the Netherlands like 1 year ago. I don't want to have another move, or like, hey, would that be a city that is like, is that a large city or a small city, because I'm completely blind and it would be the whole thing for me to navigate in that city. So usually what I do is I just, in my first email, which is usually in reply to their email, I just throw it in there somewhere. But and then I make sure that they see it.
So
So that, yeah, yeah.
what made you get into web development as opposed to something maybe like scientific programming or data operations, things like that, which
Yeah.
they don't have user interfaces?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's mostly um, personal preference. I interact much better with things that are tangible, things that I can interact with. I'm not. I suck at research, like to be honest. so so like I like the main reason I got into programming was to help people. Um, I feel like it's very powerful to solve a problem once and have millions of people use that solution every day, whenever they want to. And like in research, I don't really feel that, and in like scientific programming, I don't really feel that, like that goal of, I'm creating something tangible now. It's mostly like I'm solving a problem now for people to use in the future. um,
Right.
that doesn't really make me feel happy. So web development is not um, a really like 100% accessible field. But the good thing is that as we get more and more into like microservices and connected, like Internet of Things, like connected devices, you get to deal more with multiple interfaces to the same data. Like for example, you could have access to the same data with Echo Dot and your phone and your web browser, which means there has to be one single API behind all of them, or like a collection of endpoints or whatever. So this, as we're getting more and more into multiple devices, this area that I could contribute to a lot is growing larger. So like it is at least heading in the right direction for my benefit. Um, and like I see a lot of like in conferences and like places that I go to, I see a lot of technologies being built around building web APIs, or like more infrastructure stuff, because like the web is growing at a very rapid pace, and then like it creates a lot of new opportunities that are not 100% visual. Like for example, the job I'm doing currently at booking.com, it is building tooling so that other developers can create their own little microservices or like services and deploy them onto the booking platform. Uh, so this is a very non-visual um, kind of job where I can create command line applications that don't really need much of a user interface, and also like I can create at some points where it's needed, like web APIs that these commands run, or like call and then make decisions and stuff like that. So um, it is I am like slowly shaping my career in a way that would allow me to search jobs much easier in the future.
Yeah, and
And
I think with containerization and with DevOps becoming its own real, its own thing. Like full stack is nice, but when you get into really large, applications and large corporations, they full stack is it's just a nice to have, but nobody's really running all the servers and doing all of the back end coding and doing the front end.
yes,
Those things get
yes,
delegated out. So it seems to me that there's a huge amount of things that are accessible to you.
right. And plus, one thing that I really learned, and I really it took me a long time to learn, mainly because of okay, so I'll get to that. Um, I, so I grew up in a family with two. So we were three siblings. I was the only blind person in the whole house and in the whole family, plus my whole relatives, and probably like in my lifetime, no one knew how to deal with a blind child. So everyone freaked out when I was born, and I had to like grow up in an environment where I had to constantly prove like this was my mental monologue. Like you have to prove to your parents that you are just as capable as your other two brothers. But what this made happen is that I was not always picking the right battles. It was just a whole like I want to just be good at everything and like everyone and like in every single field. But also one thing I learned when I grew up a bit older was um, you it is very much about positioning as well. So for example, if I see that like one thing I wanted to do was to go for startups, but of course in a really smaller environment where you're gonna go and hit the market really fast, it makes sense to hire a full stack developer as opposed to a backend developer and a front end developer, because like at that point you just want to get a quick sketch of an idea out into the world. You don't want to build the perfect solution from the very beginning, not necessarily. and and like so a lot of it was me learning that you should target the right people, that the people that need what you are providing, or if you're not finding these people, figure out how you can change what you're providing to match theirs. So kind of like this is something I read from John Summers, um, who is like an ex developer that has like podcasts and blogs and stuff. I think I read this like 3 4 years ago, and it kind of changed my mindset about how I approach like career building and developing in general. And he was saying that like look at yourself as a business as opposed to looking at yourself as a person. So like you're a business that is providing development services. How would this work? And this whole massive like having this mindset shift is a massive change in how you approach your job in general. Like am I okay, so I've been working here for 1 year. Do I actually provide the value that these people are looking for, or do I not? Which gives you a lot of like insight into, am I doing the right thing here? Am I in the right position? Or like, do I actually like this job? And like, do the people that I'm working for, do they like what I'm providing? So I think that is also a very like for me that was a very interesting point to always try and look at yourself as a business as opposed to a person.
Right, and then you look at these companies you work for as customers, and
Exactly.
just as Netflix sells to certain kinds of customers, Amazon sells to other kinds of customers.
Exactly.
They know how to target the right customers in order to maximize, their profits. But in this case, it would be employment.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Yeah.
that's a really great way of thinking about it. One thing I was wondering was you had mentioned you had mentioned that once you moved into the professional world, that things started getting a lot better because they were giving you projects and things like that, and you were actually
Yeah.
able to
Yeah.
practice a lot more. What was your first break into the professional world? What kind of company was it, and how did they? How did? What were the challenges in getting that first break?
Um. So my first job was again. I'm giving you this background information so that you can understand the mindset behind how things happened.
Sure.
At the time, I had so my family were completely against me studying computers because they were thinking no one in their right mind will actually hire you. Um, but but that mindset, even though I actually pushed ahead and did it, that mindset was what I had in the background. So I was like, if you asked me at the time, I was like, I have no idea how the hell I'm supposed to find a job once I quit university, or like once I get out of university at any point. So that's why when I got a job offer from a company, I was pretty eager in it. Like so far, I went so far as to say, just give me the minimum wage and I'm fine working with you anyway. Mostly because I wanted the job. I wanted in my resume to say I have been working for this company for 1 year, to make it a possibility that if people, like, if another company thinks they can hire him, we can hire him too. That was my mindset at the time, which was pretty wrong. But like what that made happen is that like in the company, um, I was also like I was having a very low self confidence, and that really affected how the higher level management reacted to me, because they were feeling this lower self confidence as well. And okay, there were bad moments where I felt like that low self confidence is being abused and misused in all sorts of ways, and that actually empowered me to say, you know what, I'm gonna go search for another job and stop thinking about the fact that no one's going to hire me, and try to either improve my skills so that I get hired, or try to figure out what the market is looking for so that I can go learn it and then provide that skill or that service or whatever. And that whole ordeal of searching for jobs, failing at interviews, trying different strategies, and finding out that, oh, actually I can make a difference. That had a massive impact in my self confidence, and also in me learning, okay, what sorts of people should I target? How should I talk to people? And like, how should I present myself in a way that it's not like being used against me, the fact that I can't see, for example. And uh, and so like it had a lot of like I would look at my first job experience as a really bad start, but a really bad start that sets me up for more success in the future,
Well, it
because I
also
just had to go through that.
and it broke the spell of thinking that you're unhireable.
Yes, yes, yes.
So
That's I think that's the most important thing, because when you're doing a job search, and because we all know the imposter syndrome, right? When you're doing a job search and you're in your head, you're thinking, holy crap, these people are not going to hire me. That's a completely different approach, and they will see a completely different you than if you're thinking, whether or not they're hiring me, I need to be me and tell them what it is exactly that I can do and cannot do. And this goes for everyone. It's just that I had to learn it the hard way.
right. And what kind of job was it?
So I was doing PHP. So in my first job, I was doing PHP development. I was doing mostly backend, and I was also doing Groovy. Uh, and it was a software shop. We were building like websites, web applications for other companies. It was 99% WordPress, just because it's quick to build applications. Like
Mm-hmm.
software shops love CMS, like content management systems.
Totally.
Um, yeah, and but there was one single application that was not using using WordPress, and I was working in that project because that required a more custom solution. Um, and that was what I was working on, because WordPress and like, for example, like Drupal and all those other content management systems, they put user interface pretty much at the center, like front and center of everything. So when you're building a plugin from the very beginning, you have to figure out, okay, how is the interface going to look like, and then start developing. With what I was working on, you could say how the feature is going to be like what feature are we going to look for? okay, why are we going to have this feature? And that pretty much defines what I need to work on a lot to me as well. It doesn't begin with user interface, it begins with a feature. So that is also like, in that job I learned a lot about how I communicate, because like there is a lot of study going into, for example, body language versus uh, I don't know, like verbal communication, but there's not really much research or like much content available in, okay, for example, like what if you don't have body language available, like at the phone, or I don't know, like when you're talking remotely with people, how can you figure out what people feel like? And a lot of that was stuff that I had to work out slowly in my first job, because in a professional environment, stuff like that starts to matter a lot more than in life, because whatever you say has an impact in your job tomorrow.
Right. So let's talk about some of the tools that you're using. So have they evolved over time, or did you find something that worked and you just kept using it?
So yeah, they have evolved over time. Like I made a post, I think in 2016, about the tools that I'm using. It was called "The Tools of a Blind Programmer." It was what initially allowed me to get a lot of recognition worldwide, and then just start slowly getting job offers. Um, the tools that I have talked about in that post, I don't use anymore, mostly because, like, for example, at booking I'm using a Mac computer, and that changes everything. Like the whole the all those tools that I wrote about in that post were Windows tools. Like I was using Eclipse as my IDE, or like Eclipse based IDEs. I was doing PHP, like as a programming language, and like here I'm doing Go or like Perl. I try to run away from Perl. And
But why ever would you do that?
yeah. I yeah, I'll get to that in a second. No, not the why, but like that was a very interesting experience I had. But like, um, so for example, I'm using Mac, and then on the Mac you don't have as much of an accessibility anymore. So now I'm using something called Emacs Speak, which is a plugin for Emacs, um, and it enables Emacs to speak, which is a very cool concept, because now you have access to all the APIs in your editor, and you can, like, whenever something doesn't speak, you can actually go in and put in some Lisp code and make it work,
It
which
didn't.
is very
It didn't. It didn't. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it didn't
no,
occur
that's
to
okay.
me until just now that a text-based editor would definitely be more accessible, right? So, in something like Atom or even Visual Studio Code, I mean,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
has
exactly.
visual built into the name, right? So,
Yeah.
there's certain things you have to click on with the mouse, and that would make it more difficult. So,
Exactly,
so
yeah.
were you using Vim before, or if you always used Emacs?
No, I've only just used Emacs because Vim doesn't have a similar thing to Emacs Speak. So
Gotcha.
Emacs Speak does a lot of other stuff. For example, indentation levels. It announces indentation levels, which are pretty interesting and pretty useful. I mean, a lot of people think if you can't see, then indentation is not really important. But like my brain does it, like for example, a divide by 2 or divide by 4, depending on the programming language or the format that I'm in the current source file. So I have a general idea of, okay, I'm going deeper. And then, for example, if I want to quickly scroll, so like one thing that sighted people have, that helps them a lot, is being able to just look at one screen full of text, which is a very
Yeah.
interesting ability. And it limits me a lot that I can't really do that, because like I'm using a software that reads one line at a time, and that's how I can control it. I can tell it to read a word or a line or a character, but I can't tell it to read the whole screen because then I'm looking at a lot of useless information in the meantime because I can't use any visual cues. So what's happening is that, like, for example, when I'm coding, I'm using a lot of searches, I'm using a lot of hotkeys to jump around next function, previous function, go to declaration, stuff like that. And like I do need these to be built in. So like, for example, there are some Vim plugins that provide that, but also you need to, like, for example, with Emacs and Emacs Speak, one of the things that Emacs Speak gives you is the ability to know what kind of like word you're standing on. Is it actually a call to a function, or like is it a variable name, or like is like all these little visual cues that you have and you take, like you are pretty used to, but now in a more audio based format. Like this is different pitches in the sound, or like different sounds completely, and like that gives me more of an ability to scroll if I wanted to. So like, for example, Kubernetes has very huge YAML configurations, and a lot of it is like me trying to figure out, okay, how can I jump through this useless bit of information that I don't need at this moment, because I can't search anymore because I don't know what is going to come up. You know, like in a programming language, you can search for, I don't know, like function or func, or I don't know, like whatever, like public or whatever that it could signify something in like another block. But in YAML, you can't really do that because you don't know what follows this block. So like what I can do with Emacs Speak is that I can just quickly press a down arrow and listen to what it says. Like it says indent 8, indent 8, indent 10. And I'm like, I'm not really interested in this level. Let's go until I hear indent 6. And I don't have to listen to the whole line anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of our viewers is actually wanted to ask the question of how Emacs Speak handles tabs versus spaces, and if you have a preference.
Yeah,
I think he's trying to start a war.
I hate spaces. Everyone must use tabs.
Right.
So
Elio says we're both wrong, though. Isn't that right? What is it? What's the correct answer, Elio?
So there was a thing years ago called elastic tab stops, and it automatically it generates this tabular grid. So one tab now becomes a semantic thing, meaning one level of indentation.
Right.
So whatever you do, it visually aligns all the things on the same level. Even if you make a word longer, they all stay lined up really nicely. And every time you need a single tab character to say, semantically, give me another level of indentation, which it sounds like that's kind of the way. When I was listening to what you've talked about over the last like 15 minutes, moving around text without visual benefit, it seems like you need a lot more understanding of the actual meaning and structure.
Semantics, yes.
Yeah, so it seems like we've been able to get away visually with dealing with like just really poorly shoddy like we do a lot of kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? We do a lot of kind of filling in the gaps visually and just ignoring all the trash and the lack of structure, and we're able to kind of stumble through and make it work, which is harder to get away with if you don't have the benefit of a big high-res screen to filter through this stuff.
And also like a couple of screens as opposed to one. I mean, that is like, I can never imagine how it feels like to look at two screens that way. Like that is something I've never been it's kind of like 3D, something I will never understand.
Does
well, it's interesting because people talk about multitasking, and it's really more of a myth. Like there's no such thing as multitasking. We kind of talked about this, I think, pre-show, and you mentioned how you were talking to DC, and then he typed something and your screen reader started reading in your ear, and he's talking and the thing's talking, and how you can't really pay attention to both. And I made a comment about in-band signaling. But yeah, we have this idea that the human mind can do more than one thing at once, and all the studies point to that being completely false. The one kind of exception, as I mentioned, there's that surgery. I think it's to deal with a seizure disorder. They sever the two halves of the brain, and those people can like draw with one hand and write a paragraph with the other. But that's like the only example I've ever seen of anyone able to do two completely different tasks at
Yeah,
once.
and that's an example we created, right?
Yeah, and it's not a normal
Like,
state of things. Like it's an artificial example. So, you know, you have all these people, oh, I'm great at multitasking. And when they actually do the study, it's like, no, you're actually less efficient than if you just did one task and did the other. And what you're
yeah,
doing is just like a computer with a single processor core. You're just
yeah,
switching between tasks and doing them
pretty
serially.
rapidly. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you're kind of forced to realize some of these structural things in a much more explicit way without the benefit of a visual display.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, go
Sorry.
ahead.
No, that's okay.
I was just going to say, so let's circle back then to the tabs versus spaces. Do you have a preference in this, and are there other conventions that coders do or don't do that affect your accessibility?
So tabs versus spaces, Emacs Peak and other screen readers, what they do is they try to, based on the programming language, just convert that into a semantic thing, as Elio was saying. So like they just say indent 12, assuming that each tab is 4 spaces, for example, or like in YAML, it would be indent 4 means like 2 tabs or like 4 spaces.
Mhm.
So like what it converts down to is the number of spaces, but if you just use tabs, then depending on the programming language, they just try to convert that into spaces as well, because it would be really horrible for it to say tab 2 spaces tab, for example, because like you actually have that. Like if you like one thing these screen readers made me realize in a horrible way is that different editors put in different tabs and spaces. And so while these tools were evolving, I had to listen to weird things like tab 4 space tab, and then I had to convert that to like I don't know, like 16 spaces. And or like what I usually did was like I just told my editor, just go convert all of these to tabs or spaces, I don't care, something that I can understand instead of a mix of both.
What happens if there's, like, say, 3 spaces when you actually have it set to 4 spaces for a tab?
It just says 3 like indentation 3.
Gotcha.
So like yeah, so there is a lot of so depending on the programming language, there is a lot of pre-development things that I might have to do. Like okay, so the spaces here are messed up, let me fix that first. Okay, now I'm just gonna slowly get into programming mode now that the whole file is turned into something I can work on. But much more annoying than the like tabs, much more annoying than tabs is something that I was giving a talk about very recently, and that's like code structure. This is something that affects everyone. And like in my first talk, someone was like, hey, it's great, now I know how to write more accessible code. And I was saying, dude, no, don't think of it like that. I'm not saying write code that is great for me. I'm saying this stuff affects me more, but it does affect you. So what I'm saying is use my experience to improve how you work. It's just, you know, like there's this study that a friend of mine was doing, and he was using people that are super sensitive to different kinds of food in an effort to figure out what kind of food actually works and which ones are more harmful to you. And like he was using these people's hypersensitivity as a guide. And I was like, oh, that's like how I approach life. so like a lot of things affect me more than others. But like once I tell them, you know, you're doing things this way and it is bad, and they're like, actually, yeah, I feel like it has been lying at the back of my mind for like 5 years or so, but I just, you know, through a habit, I just have been doing it, which is what Elio was talking about. This whole being able to see a screen full is giving you guys a lot of an upper hand, but is also hiding a lot of stuff from you. Like, for example, when you have a function that is 50 lines long, it is probably doing more than one thing, or it's probably doing more than 2 things. And like being able to understand this as a newcomer to a whole, like I don't know, a company is hard. Being able to do this once you come back to this code for after 4 months is hard. For me, like doing it every day is hard because I have to keep the context in my head. I can't just move my head up and then see the beginning of the function. I have to actually build a context as I go down. So like, okay, so we have this variable, it is a counter. Oh, we also have this other variable, which is the highest number we have so far. Oh, and what was this other variable? Wait, let me go up and look that up. Oh, wait. Oh, okay.
So that makes me really curious. Since you're talking about kind of the meaning, the semantics there, are you familiar at all with some of the more exotic cutting edge stuff like Idris and Agda and Coke? I think Idris is the one that's most interesting in this context. Some of these have really advanced like linear typing systems where you can define a lot of the aspects of the program and what is correct within the language itself, within just the type system of the language.
Okay.
So Idris offers something called whole-based programming, where you can go ahead and you can, because you're describing the structure that has to be there for this to work at all, instead of the editor just dumbly shuffling around lines of text and you split a line and the editor doesn't care, it just splits the line. It has no understanding what's going on.
Yeah.
Something like Idris, as you type things, it can look at the thing you typed, it can look up the type of the thing you just typed, and it can say, oh, you're doing a case, like a switch statement on that value. Well, that value is part of a union type that has 3 different subtypes, that it must be one of those and only one of those. So I'm just going to give you a 3-branch pattern match with whole, where I don't know what you're going to do on each type, but I know you have to have these 3 or your code is broken. So
right.
I'm wondering if there's any work being done with these more advanced type systems that would allow, what do we want to call this? Like not any kind of non-visual programming, because the system understands the code it's writing. It seems like it would have a massive advantage in assisting you over these visual systems that are really quite stupid and just really don't understand the code that they're managing at all.
Right. So 2 things there. One thing was that at some point I really believed that programming languages can prevent people from doing shitty things. What I realized after joining Booking was that programming languages can only help you not to do shitty things. They don't prevent you from doing shit. So like the whole functions and stuff that I was talking about, like if someone's mind works in a chaotic, non-organized way, they are gonna do it no matter what programming language, with what features they have.
I've had people tell me on, especially on social media when I was on that more, they have like a really horrible little fragment of text, just full of grammatical and spelling errors, and they're like, well, you know what I mean. I'm pretty sure looking at that text that even you don't know what you mean. So
yeah, exactly. So like so for example, like Go, I really loved Go because I was like, it forces you to handle those errors. They're so cool, because finally you can't get like you can't do like a programming, like you can't call a function without catching the exception. Wow, I don't have to go and hunt people's errors anymore. All right, nice, that's so cool. And until I saw these pieces of code where the person was actually putting in an underline to get around the whole error catching ways of Go, and then circumvent the whole thing. And I was like, so the programming language allows you to handle errors. It is telling you that you are getting an error, but you are getting around it. So why are you doing this weird thing, even though you should handle it? So there is a lot of stuff that the programming language can do, but it can never make you, like, I think that is my dream programming language, a programming language that makes everyone the same.
well, so you're tapping into what was his name? The engineer that invented Satan, the old network suite that's not as popular anymore, but it was a security testing suite called Satan. And his famous quote, I wish programming was 1,000 times more difficult, because then only really, really intelligent, like really top-notch programmers write code.
I mean that would be putting me in top-notch category. I'm not. I think in that case, I would never get into programming because I'm not really top-notch. But
Likewise.
yeah. Like I think what we actually need is like people being more like looking at their development as kind of a craft as opposed to something I do in the morning and then go home.
Yeah. Well, there is one more thing that I want to mention, and this is like a 20-plus-year-old research. There's a thing out of MIT called Alloy, and Alloy is I'm trying to think how to categorize it. It's a system in which you describe the logical structure of what you're working on. And it's not like Coke, where it tries to give you a full 100% mathematical proof of the correctness of the system.
Right.
Alloy says, we're going to take some shortcuts so we can do this really, really fast. And we're going to try to find logical counterexamples that you haven't covered, like gaps in your description of your system. And just because we didn't find anything doesn't mean your system's perfect. But if we found something, it definitely means your system's not correct. It's broken.
Right.
So when you're saying the programming language can't make you write good code, there's actually a tiny bit of research in the programming language kind of like pointing out the really dumb stuff you're doing. That may actually be possible.
Yeah. I mean, so that's the second thing I was going to talk about is you have to also look at the mainstream like adoption of a technology, because like we're talking about the career. I like, for example, Scala is really great when you're doing like university level experimental stuff, but then look at it in a job level, and then you have like two things coming into play. One, like how many companies in my vicinity are using this technology? Not many. I'd say one or two. But two, even those that are using it, how are they using it? Writing one-liners that actually do 10,000 things in one line, which is not really good for my brain. So like, for example, with Alloy, it would be great if everyone were to adopt it, so that I could also like get like use its really cool features in the sense that like telling programmers not to do things a certain way. But like what we're seeing now is that with all this massive changes in technology every day, like programming languages coming in from left and right, like companies are like, okay, so should I go with Go or Python or Node.js or PHP or so like everyone's like pretty confused at the moment. So because like Alloy hasn't been one of those that has made it to that mainstream comparison yet. Using it wouldn't make me much of an edge. It would just make me more like go into a corner that then I have to find my way out of at some point. But
go ahead.
But one thing I was actually noticing was some compilers and stuff, they're really good at telling you stuff that you shouldn't do. For example, with Go, you have something like linters that they look at your code and they're like, you have a function that doesn't have a return statement, but you said it has a return type, or like you have.
You're just you keep mentioning Go. Have you played with Rust at all?
Yes.
Okay,
just a little.
You mentioned, like, Go is not a bad language. I got a lot of friends who are getting more into it. But the stuff like the linters and stuff technically are all optional, where the stuff you're talking about is a little more mandatory in Rust. The error handling, instead of having you immediately check a second return value, which you could just not do, but the linter might catch. In Rust, the compiler, you pass the result back as a result object, again, which is a union type, that it has to be one or the other, and it forces you to handle both cases. So it's not like you have to do the smart thing, the correct thing in Rust. You The code won't even
Yeah.
compile if you choose not to. So
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. Like whenever that's the point I was trying to make. Whenever you make something optional, people decide not to use it. So
Right.
so
Yeah.
like then then like I like for example I use that a lot because having this structure in place makes me just so much more like this is not I've actually tested this. This is so much unbelievably more productive that I'm like, I'm not
Huh.
I'm actually gonna test this tool, like test these tools on my code before I even start writing any code, so that I can fix all the messy problems
Yeah.
first and then get into writing code. Because like the whole time I spend fixing that code is like so much more than the time I would spend trying to understand what the hell it is this person is trying to do. But
Yeah.
like a language that stops things is really great until it has to make compromises, and like
Yeah.
and the language at the language level you have to always deal with this community issue, like do I make a compromise here or do I push on this like on this convention, for example, like people are really good at coming up with counter examples of conventions not working, like what if I do this really weird thing and I don't need tabs? And if I put tabs here, stuff breaks. But if I put spaces here, stuff doesn't break. So we should all
Yeah.
use spaces. And then as soon as you go, okay, great, then let's use spaces. And someone else comes up and says, oh, actually, 10 years ago, I was doing C++, and then this happened, and that went on, and then like it was all
Yeah.
about tabs.
I think you're explaining the fundamentals of convention wars,
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
everybody has their use cases which they want the rest of the world to optimize for, and
Exactly.
we end up all just arguing over what's better
Yeah.
when ultimately the only thing that really matters from what I'm listening to is that you pick a convention and you consistently stick to it.
Well,
Yeah, and
sometimes
you try
just
to make
people that
yeah
want to watch the world burn, and they're like, "What if I made a language of nothing but white space?"
Right?
Which actually that equalizes the playing field, doesn't it? Because now I can't see it either.
So
Yeah.
I got a question because I'm very curious about this. You were born blind, right?
Yes.
So you've never seen anything.
No.
Okay, so when I picture code in my mind, when I think about code, I think of it visually. I actually see the code the same way that I see it on the screen. And so for you, though, it must be different, right? It's got to be like an understanding of it.
Yes, exactly. It's more like it's really hard to. So this whole this could be a rabbit hole. I'm just gonna begin giving you an overview, and then you can, if you want, you can more ask questions into more bits and pieces. But like to give you an understanding of how I perceive the world, I have to first give you an idea of how it is not to actually be able to see. So one thing I've noticed is that in my mind, whenever I'm perceiving something, whenever I'm visualizing something, it is very tactile. It doesn't matter if I can actually touch that thing. It feels like, so like for example, when you ask me to picture a desk, I can't picture looking at a desk from a distance. And like that is pretty, I think this is pretty fundamental in our differences. Like you can actually imagine yourself standing at the door and looking into a room. I can't do that. Like I can't ever picture stuff that I can't feel from like up close, like stuff that I can actually touch and feel. So like for example with indentation, what I picture is white space, like flat something, that I'm touching, as opposed to like non-flat. So like the whole concepts are pretty confusing if I were to translate it to how you understand things. But like for example, when I look at code, I don't really visualize code in text. I visualize code in kind of like branches or like lines, like maybe even raised lines. Like okay, so here it splits into two lines, which is kind of like like more of my understanding of this code. Like it's kind of like an AST of the whole code, like the syntactic tree of the code, as opposed to more like the code letters themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it sort for you it sort of maps back to how you. So, for instance, when I think of white space, I can also visualize that as a flat plane. That would be that I'm building things onto in different structures. But for you, it's like it maps back in your brain to a sensation or
Yes.
an understanding of flatness in a physical sense.
Yes, exactly, yes.
And so you're not you can't visualize it because you don't have a frame of reference for that kind of information or that kind of perception. But you have analogs for each of these things, and it's kind of like we're both talking about the same thing, understanding the same thing, but with different like
with different
language or representations.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, exactly. So like conceptually, we're all storing the same kind of data. It's just that we see it in our brain in a different way. So like when you remember that horrible code that you had to deal with, you see it a certain way. I see it a certain way. I'm like, so yeah, it maps into different sensations, mostly because our ways of interacting with the world are very different. Like mine are very like based on hearing plus touch. Yours are mostly seeing, and whenever sight doesn't work, maybe we even try touching or hearing things. So and that also comes back to how like pervasive the sense of sight is. Like it is so overpowering that like for example, the whole thing that I don't see means that I miss a lot of advertisement, for example. So I lose a lot of memes and stuff on the internet. So like sometimes people write stuff and I'm like, huh, what does that actually mean? And then I realize that okay, so this was I read about like this advertisement that made that like little, I don't know, figure or something that did that thing, and then now it's a meme. And so like the whole sense of touch is so easy to stimulate, and it gets stimulated so much that it's really hard to say, okay, wait, I'm gonna stop looking now, and then I'm going to start using my other senses. It's like pretty hard.
Right.
A lot of people, like when they see me, they get inspired to suddenly close their eyes and walk down the stairs. Or I don't know, walk around in their room, and they're like, "It sucks. It's pretty horrible." And I'm like, "Yeah, because you have 0 minutes of experience, maybe even 1 minute of experience with being blind. I have 27 years, so just like any skill, it takes time to develop. But it also, like in my case, it also means that like when communicating with people, I have to do a lot of translation back and forth between how they perceive things and how it makes sense to me. Like, for example, that's why I never go near machine learning, because that's a very like whenever I start reading a book about machine learning, it starts with chapter 1, plotting data. Oops, didn't work.
Well, are there assistive devices that can take, say, a chart and provide a topical relief version of it that you can touch?
Yes, but the problem is that charting is a very visual. So that's what I was talking about earlier. There is not much research into how we can optimize data for other senses. Like for example, my wife is also blind, and one thing that she used to do internet marketing in Iran, and when we moved here, she is now without a job because she, like everyone here, uses Google Analytics, and Google Analytics just provides so many charts.
Right.
And then she's like, I have no idea how to use these charts. But then the thing is, if you were to have a kind of like a braille display or something that were to turn this into a tactile thing, it would take me a long time to go through it and make sense of it, as opposed to if you were to say, okay, so what kind of data do you want out of this chart? And I would say, like when is our traffic increasing? Like what are our traffic spikes like? and then you would say, you know, like from January to March we had one spike of like up to like 500 or so, and then March to so like you need an interpreter more like an interpreter that gives you important information that you can filter, as opposed to a tactile way of providing the same visual data, because it doesn't make sense through your fingers, you know, like it doesn't make sense if you feel it. It makes sense if you see it.
Do you
And
think
that's the
it's
point of it.
Do you think it's possible to have in the future somebody will come up with a novel way of being able to provide a tactile version of this kind of data, like in charts and things like that? Is this like is there an assistive device not yet invented that you can conceive of that would possibly bridge this gap?
So there is a device that is being actively worked on. I read about it fairly recently. It is a kind of a large braille display. So braille displays are stuff that you can use for reading text in braille,
Right.
but they conventionally only have one line of text, kind of like how screen readers interact with, like how you would interact with your computer through a screen reader. It's like one line at a time. But what this one does is you can actually feed it, kind of like look at it, kind of like your the share function on your phone. You can take any picture and feed it to this device, and it would tell you, like it would show it to you like on a tactile grid. So imagine if you could right click on any image and say, I don't know, send to this device, and it would actually show that exact image exactly as it is to you. Mm-hmm. But so this is a work in progress, but I see it fading because, as I said, the data, that way of representing data through lines and trend lines and charts and stuff, that is optimized for being consumed through your eyes,
Right.
not through tactile feedback.
Well, that makes me wonder whether or not perhaps that, you know, because that's how I was visualizing the idea of, you know, or how I was conceiving of an assistive device, which would be just basically it would be if you could think of it as a high resolution display that based upon there being like different colors would essentially lift and lower the height of a pixel, right? Yeah. And so you could feel like a square if you were displaying a square. But maybe that's like you're saying, that has its limitations, and it might not work for, you know, say if you had a line plot that was very erratic. It would be really difficult to feel the subtleties that we see in the chart. But exactly. But what about with improvements in image recognition, actually having machine learning algorithms interpret the visual and then convert it back into semantic text? Yes.
This is, I think, much more useful because I like what I could, like, this is actually something that I was thinking about of implementing, because what I am thinking is that you can take the data behind any chart and then, like, just instead of looking at that, instead of turning it into an image and trying to understand the image, just look at the data before the image is generated, and then try to understand or try to at least allow the user to tell you a bit more about what kind of data this is, so that you could apply the right machine learning algorithms to it to understand it. I feel like it's very easy to do, but I don't have the machine learning expertise to actually do it. But I feel like if like, for example, a lot of websites actually use JavaScript libraries to turn JSON data into a chart. Now, if you could write a system that would just go into the HTML, get that data, and then import it into an application, and then do some algorithms on it based on user input, that would pretty much solve a lot of problems you see on the net with images. And then, once you have that general idea worked out, then you can just say, okay, one source of input is an actual image that we can then try and analyze.
That's it. Obviously, image recognition isn't there yet,
Right.
because I mean, but I mean, it seems to me that if they do get image recognition down much better than it is now, and they have data sets that they can pull from,
Right.
would it be useful, like for instance, having a pair of glasses that you can put on, and it would say the type of shape that it's looking at and the color of
See,
it and things like
I,
that.
I think you're still thinking about this from a visual standpoint. I've seen some interesting research. Um, well, several different things here. One is I've seen there's a guy that actually teaches kids who are blind how to echolocate. And it's really interesting. You make like a little click sound with your mouth. It usually has to be a short sound. And you can actually learn how to visualize a 3D space with enough resolution to actually ride a bike and tell where the curb on the side of the street is so you don't fall over. So it is possible for the human brain to take in, spatial stuff and understand it without, light. So I don't know if that could be adapted into anything, almost like an auditory stereogram. But like you were talking about colors earlier and how would you represent those by heights? I think the better way to do it, we just don't have the technology really for it yet, would be to represent colors by textures.
Right.
So if you can actually change the surface texture, you have smooth and rough and like all different types of textures that the same shape could be represented. The character of it could be differentiated by the texture you would feel. Because actually, when we're talking about different types of like how do we take in data, you only need about 30 frames a second to do a reasonable job of fooling the eye into perceiving motion. In order for haptic feedback, like controls on anything where it's about feeling velocity changes on like a steering wheel for like a racing game, the minimum you can get away with is 1 kilohertz. You have to have at least 1,000 times a second the display. Anything lower than that is totally unconvincing. So the temporal resolution of touch is actually far, far higher by, not quite 2 orders of magnitude above the visual system. So it's hard to get out of that. How do we visualize without vision? But there's some interesting research pointing to if we could do that, then there might be some really novel ways. And I can't remember it right now, but there's some stuff about timing, like what they used to do to actually time different experiments before quartz crystals or high quality watches were widespread globally. They would actually play music because it's hard to track time without a watch or a clock, a chronograph. But if you play music, we can actually keep pretty accurate time and keep a pretty reliable beat through music. So they actually used to like time experiments when they were doing like coast experiments down a slope. Like if you're testing what do you want to coat a wheel with for reduced rolling resistance down a slope, 10% incline over so many 100 feet, play a song, see how far you get into the song.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it turns out Durf Diggler, one of our listeners, he's just posted a link to a Microsoft technology called Seeing AI. Have you heard of this?
Okay.
Yes.
Do you use that?
It is not in the Netherlands yet, but that is an example of people using mainstream technologies to provide something useful for the blind. So this is actually one thing that I wanted to mention. One thing that, so when you start looking at research and stuff for solving a problem for blind people, there's not usually not a good mainstream reception. But when you look at it like, okay, for example, here is how we could use this technology, and then everyone goes and implements that technology, and then you're like, okay, so here is how we can also adapt this technology to make other people's lives easier. So like, for example, Microsoft has this AI APIs that you can use. I forget the name of the AI API. I don't remember. But you can actually send it any kind of image, and it gives you all sorts of information about that.
Yeah, the Seeing AI. I think that's
No,
the
no,
name
but
of.
like, so that's the app,
Right.
but it connects to Microsoft's new offering,
Ah,
which is, we have a web service. You give us stuff, we give you information about that thing.
gotcha.
And like, for example, we can give you some information about the image and stuff like that. But so to help train their AI and also to help people, they are like, okay, so who are the people who need this technology a lot? Oh, blind people. Let's actually provide a front end to the system for them so that we get to train our AI and they get to experience, like, for example, they get to read text. So like one of the really cool things Seeing AI does, just because it's using AI, is that, for example, conventionally you had to take it when you wanted to read some text on your phone, you had to take a picture of it and then it would send it to a server, and then the server would send you a response back. But then you had to take so many pictures in an effort to capture the exact paper, because like sometimes the edges wouldn't be visible, sometimes you would be holding it a bit tilted and stuff like that. So what they've done is, because this is using AI, your phone in real time tells you, okay, move your phone a bit higher, a bit to the left, move it a bit back, click. So it's pretty great in guiding you to take the right picture, which means stuff takes so much less time to do. But like, this is one of the examples of actually applying a mainstream like technology to solving a problem with for blind people. And that's what like I was getting at with the whole programming language thing. As soon as you bring blind people or deaf people or any other sort of like I'd say, sorry, unusual might not be the right word, but like,
Yeah.
I don't know, uh, like
People with disabilities.
yeah, but not only that, but like whatever minority, whatever group you bring into your statement, like, I don't know, maybe you decide to focus on Iranians, or like maybe you decide to focus on
Yeah.
Americans, and then whenever you bring a group name, everyone is like, oh, but what about the rest of the world? Why should we focus on this group exclusively? And then stuff
Yeah.
doesn't happen. But if you
Yeah.
say, like, we're gonna work on this really cool thing, and also we're going to use one of the side effects to use Americans like do this, or to use Iranians but do that, and then it all becomes a new problem. Now it's like, okay, we have the technology, we can use it in 10 different ways, but this is just one way out of that, like out of those 10.
Right.
So like, if you talk about, hey, how can we make charts accessible to blind people, there's not much interest. But if
Right.
you say, how can we write a machine learning like system that pulls data, like pulls understanding out of data, which means, like, for example, Google would be able to understand all the charts that are on the internet, for example.
Or
Then
another example I'm thinking of is, for instance, like the Amazon Alexa, right? So
right,
that's trying to solve for everybody hands-free,
exactly,
eyes-free operation, and it just
exactly.
incidentally happens to probably be useful for the blind as
For
well.
blind people as well. Yeah, exactly. So like, that's why, like, for example, stuff like SEO, where at some point people were saying put in alt tags for your images, alt being like an attribute on your image that tells
Yep.
what this image is about.
Yeah.
So like, conventionally this was being used when your browser wouldn't be able to load the image, but this was like many years ago, right? But
Yeah.
like, now at some point Google was using that, and then it actually forced people to put in very descriptive alt text. Like, I would actually sometimes see a really good alt description and I'm like, wow, okay, so Google wanted help indexing images, and they actually, in that path, they actually helped us too.
Huh.
uh, of course, people ended up abusing that system. Of course, it was removed, and it doesn't have much of a bearing nowadays. And people are like, "Oh, stop putting in alt tags." But
Oh.
I'm saying, like, the whole thing is like, trying to figure out a way to make something mainstream, but also to serve your needs. It's something that I am getting better and better at. Like,
Yeah.
So
try to.
the idea is to create a product that is useful, but that impaired people can benefit from it, as one of our
Yeah.
viewers, Caviar Liberta, just said.
Yeah, and also this also comes with how you like position whatever offer you're making, right? So for example, hey, increasing my salary makes me happy, but also here's what is in it for you. So like you always have to convince everyone in the world about like why they should do something. And when it comes to disabled people or like an underrepresented group or something, everyone thinks like just a goodwill is enough, but reality is it's not. Like there's so much that goodwill can do, and at some point you start to think, okay, so what's in it for me, or what's in it for this company, or what's in it for this like I don't know, organization. And you always have to provide an offer that is super helpful to an organization or like a company or like yourself, so that in like one of the side effects ends up being help. I've helped a group of people in the long run.
So are there any assistive devices that you wish were invented, like you can conceive of them and it's not like experimental, but nobody's, something that maybe you want to make?
Yeah, my problem is that I'm not much of a visionary. I'm I think in my world I have to be so much reactive about stuff that just comes up. That I think I at some point my life has uh, stopped my dreaming power completely. So I'm not really good at answering questions like that, because I'm feeling like there is so many little problems that turn into really large problems. I was actually talking about this to a friend last night. Now it's last night, but like I was saying that like all these little problems suddenly become a huge, because like you have little decisions that you have to make every day. Like, okay, I want to go out of my house, but it's raining. And when it's raining, I have no idea what to do, because if I put on a hat, I won't hear the traffic. And in Amsterdam, that's very important because bicycles don't look out, like they just hit you. And but if I don't put on a hat, I will get super wet. So what should I do? So you make a decision. Like by the time you get to work, you've already made like 15 decisions. And we all know there's so much willpower in making choices, right? Like I don't know. I was looking at this research that said there's so many choices you can make in a day. So the whole thing with having devices is that they are useful, but I think one thing that is a lot more useful than that is fortifying our mental toughness, like mentally being strong enough to take it when it comes to you, as opposed to thinking about like, here is how I would solve the problem if I had the resources for it. So
it's learning to deal with the problem as opposed to avoiding it.
Yes, exactly. I think that's exactly right. You just put it much more eloquently than I did. Great, thanks. So, so yes, exactly. Because no matter what you think, there is going to be another problem that you don't have the tools to solve right now. So I think a lot of it is also, this was one thing that actually led me to start try and start a program, which actually failed but taught me a lot, to teach blind people more like, how can you make yourself ready for those unexpected stuff that are bound to happen, and like that no one's around there to help you, because like a lot of people grow up with the idea of, when I need help, people are there to help. But in reality, it's not like, leaning on people is not a good survival strategy. It's not, people are not always going to be there.
Right.
Even though everyone's trying to be super helpful, they have their own lives. Like, you can't just expect people to be there for you whenever you need them. So a lot of it is actually like being ready to accept that what is happening to me is happening to me, and then once you actually accept this, you can start thinking about, okay, what solutions can I get to to this problem, and how can I solve it?
That's very insightful. I think that's good advice for everybody, regardless of their background. That's very insightful. All right, so let's move on from tools. I think we have a pretty good idea of the kind of tech that you use in order to program. We talked about conventions. Unless there's other conventions you want to point out to everyone about things that everyone could do better with their code that just incidentally happen to help out with screen readers or things like that. I'm wondering. I'm wondering, for other blind people out there who might be listening to this, or might listen to it in the future, do you recommend coding to other blind people as a profession? I mean, what I'm trying to say is, obviously, if they're into coding, but what if they're into coding and they're into other things too? Would you recommend that code is a good profession for this, or have you, if you could redo it another way, would you have chosen a different profession?
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes with. Sorry, can I have no idea. Can I use expletives here or not?
Yeah. If we get the choice, no, use anything you'd like. It's just,
yeah, but it's not my term. Yeah, it's someone else's term, but it has okay.
Then
so,
just say the term then. Yeah.
Okay, great. So there's this guy who I think his name is MJ DeMarco. He has a pretty active forum on the internet about becoming a millionaire and how you can become, they call it the fast lane and the slow lane, and then they have the we are the fast laners and stuff like that. And then I was reading one of his books to get a better idea of what he's talking about, and then he has this term that he calls the fuck this moment, the moment you realize fuck this, he looks at it like that. He's like, if you want to become an entrepreneur, don't do it until you have this fuck this moment, right? Don't do it until you really are fed up with how stuff is being run and you're really ready to make a change. And that actually made me think really hard about a lot of stuff that we're doing. We're just doing it because, one, we think it may help others, force others to perceive us in a different way that we like more, or two, because it's just a hype and we like to do it. At some point there was just so many different companies being formed in the US. I'm like, what are you guys doing? This is like an entrepreneur stampede or something. One, and it made me realize that if you really like something, you will stick by it. But you should be really good, a skill you should be really good at is how to figure out if you really like something. So my advice to sum it all up is, if you really like coding, definitely get into it. It is very doable. It is very great. But you need to stand by it, because there will be moments where you're like, this is just like any profession for any kind of person. There will be moments that you encounter crappy code, you encounter crappy bosses, you encounter crappy coworkers. This is but if you really like it, then you will take these and you're like, okay, I'll just find a solution.
Right.
This is and it's all about how much you feel the need to program. That sounds weird.
No, that doesn't sound weird at all, actually. I mean, it's we talk about that a lot on the show for everybody. It's just it's like, you really aren't going to become a great programmer unless you have the compulsion to need to do it, because you have to put in so much time and you have to go through so many failures, that if you are the type of person who's just not that into coding, you're going to get sick after the 50th failure. and there's 50 million failures to go through in a lifetime of code. So
yeah, that's true, and I think that's true with anything. I think with so much information being available out there, we try and play around with things, but we don't actually like them. Like, for example, last night we were talking about, hey, should I actually go buy an espresso machine and start pulling out like espresso shots? And then I was thinking, do I really want to spend time doing that? Like in the morning, I'm waking up and I'm like, I'm late for work. And then, oh wait, now one thing I need to do is turn on this machine and then try to figure out how the hell it is I'm trying to make coffee for like 5 minutes.
Right.
So it's all about I feel more and more I feel like I need to understand, like I need to get better at listening to myself. And this is a skill I've never developed. And I think as I like go further, it becomes more and more important. It is becoming so much harder to listen to yourself when there isn't so much noise coming at you from your phone and your laptop and your emails and all that stuff. And like at some point, it's really hard for you to think, like really take a hard look at yourself and say, like, do I actually like this? And it is true for every field. Like if you're doing anything, you need to really ask yourself this question, like, do I like this enough to stick by it for like the next, I don't know, 10 years or so? Because there's going to be lots of weird stuff happening along the way. So yes, if people who are blind want to get into programming, it is very possible. It is hard, but so is anything else. So what? But like yes.
What would your best piece of advice be for other blind people that do decide to get into programming?
I think the biggest so the people who really like programming also really like one thing: figuring stuff out for themselves. Mm-hmm. Which, like, for example, leads into like a lot of people when I had to onboard them in Iran and into the companies that I was working for. Like, because in Iran, I usually managed to get in at the start. So I was like, I always had the senior title behind my name for some weird reason. But like one thing that I noticed was people who were really good at programming wanted to do everything themselves. They wouldn't go searching for a package to see if they were like someone else had done it. They would just say, oh, this is easy, I'll just start programming it. And then they will start doing stuff for like 1 week and they're like, it's actually more complicated than I thought. It's fine, I'll just spend 1 more month doing it. And then stuff goes on. So one thing that I feel like everyone, blind programmers and blind wannabe programmers included, must be really careful about is ask for help, especially in the beginning. It is much easier for me to explain to people what tools they should use in 5 minutes than for people trying everything out for days and figuring out which ones they don't know how to use and which ones they actually can learn how to use. So I think a lot of it is like search on the internet, but also don't be afraid to reach out to other blind people like me who are doing programming and then ask them for advice so that you can like quickly jump through the beginning hoops, because the last thing you want to do is play around with tools when you could be learning programming itself.
A lot of the things that you've said tonight are actually precepts in a document written by Miyamoto Musashi called the Dokodo, and Dokodo means the there's a couple interpretations, but one of them is the path of going it alone, and it's interesting that you bring up some of these things. I'm gonna try to find the exact precept that you just brought to mind, but it's essentially things like don't do it unless you're going to do it completely. You know, and
yes.
One of the big ones, the one you had just reminded me of, was do not collect weapons or practice with weapons beyond what is useful. And this can actually be modernized, I suppose, as don't practice with tools or programming languages or different kinds of libraries just for the sake of doing it. Focus on what it is that you want to do, and understand you have a finite amount of time in order to do anything, and so focus on the things that serve you well.
Yes, yes. And one more thing I've also realized is that a programming language might not have an application all the time, or like, I don't know, like it's kind of like, okay, so you have 10 hours that you can spend learning something. I used to pick up a programming book and read a programming language book. But what I realized at some point was like, okay, so it's really great to know about all these programming languages, but I don't get to use any of them. And then by tomorrow, I will probably forget them. So there is some, you can probably just search on the internet for 10 minutes and get the gist of what would be helpful to you, because like some of these programming languages have insights, like for example, like we were talking about Alloy or like other programming languages that have an interesting way of representing code or like variables and stuff like that. There is like interesting ideas there, but you can probably just Google around and then figure out what it is that people really like about it and dislike about it. But one thing that really serves you a lot more, in my opinion, is soft skills. This is something that I see a lot of programmers not focusing on, because so here's the thing: we get so much into communicating with the computer that we forget to realize that we exist in the soft world of flesh, of people, of imperfections, of like, I don't know, rainy, shitty weather, which is very common in Amsterdam, and so like we don't develop the skills we need to deal with every day. And I realized this personally too late. So I was like, okay, so how does all that programming knowledge you gathered help you now? Not quite. But like when you're learning communication, when you're learning sales, when you're learning marketing, that helps you in your everyday life. Like at some point in your everyday life, you use all those skills. So a lot of it is also like, because like one thing I got from that statement you just said was like, try to get better at assessing which weapon is going to be more useful to you. Like,
Right.
Okay, so I can deal, I don't know, like I can start with this weird katana thingy, but I could also improve my sword skills, which is like very much more useful. And I'm probably like when I'm caught with, I don't know, when bandits attack me, I have my sword in hand, probably not that weird katana. So a lot of it is also getting better at assessing which skill is going to help you a lot more, and we get very we are very susceptible to hype, especially these days. I mean, like when this guy wrote this book, there was no concept of internet throwing hype at you all the time. But like when everyone starts talking about Node.js, of course I want to go learn and see how it actually does, like what it does and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, did I actually learn something useful? Because like my company is not using it, I don't really want to use it, and then like I don't really want to even go into that path. So why did I spend like 3 days learning it? And then I would just forget it tomorrow anyway.
Right. That's a very insightful comment. That's very good. So, what are some things that I'm gonna change gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about you. So, what are some things that you wish more people knew about you?
Oh, strange question. I've got all sorts of hard questions, but this is like a whole new level.
Well, we have about 40 minutes. Or I'm sorry, we have about 20 minutes left, and
Okay.
so I figured I'd ask you some
Yes.
questions, so this way people can get to know who you are,
Yes.
since you are not just just a blind coder,
A
right?
blind developer, yes.
Right. There's other aspects to your life, I'm sure. And for the people who be interested in knowing more about you, these questions are for that. So, are there things that when I'm presuming that you've had quite a few people interview you for the blind coding stuff. But what are some things that people don't usually ask you, and you'd like people to know about you?
I think what I really would like people to do, and they don't really do, and like one thing that I think could be a lot more useful to people is, okay, so there is this initial questions about understanding how you would perceive the world if you wouldn't be able to see and stuff, which is great. But also, what I want to so like once people are past the stage, they just move away because, okay, curiosity fed, I'm gonna move on to the next curious thing. But what doesn't really get spoken about much is how can we parallelize the stuff that we share, like the stuff that we were talking about, like, okay, I do code with a completely different interface, but I get to deal with the same exact problems that you are dealing with. And then these problems affect everyone or affect both of us. So how can we find a solution for it? Or not even find a solution, but how can how can what you've learned help me, or how can what I've learned help you? Because we have two completely different worlds, but as you were pointing out, DC, is a lot of it is the same. Like what we're talking is exactly the same stuff with completely different representations. So what people kind of most of the time, what I've found is that people forget this. They forget that the base or the truth of what we're dealing with is the same. It's just that we interact with it in completely different ways.
Yeah, I was thinking about that while you were talking about it, and it seemed to me it was kind of like if we think of approaching the problem of coding, or pretty much any problem really, I was trying to come up with a metaphor for not being able to see and being able to see, and yet we're both doing the same thing. And I was thinking of a video game, and there's a lot of video games which accept using a gamepad, and some of them have mouse and keyboard inputs.
Right.
Some of them have a joystick. Some of them have
Exactly,
things. But we're all playing the same game. It's just that, exactly. And for instance, in say certain games, somebody might become just as good with a gamepad as I am with a mouse and keyboard. We both we both experience the game in different ways, but we get to the same ends in this.
Yes, exactly. And one thing I wanted to, because this analogy you're drawing is exactly much better at explaining what I wanted to say, and I want to bring what I was saying into this analogy. You have different tricks for using the keyboard. I have different tricks for using the gamepad, but the 99% of the game is the same, and we have we have so much experience to share about that 99%. Okay, your experience with maybe you have different key finger positioning tricks to pull off some really weird moves. Maybe I have some, I don't know, different positioning, finger positioning stuff. I used to do that with gamepads. I was really good at gamepads because I could just touch stuff so much faster.
Mm-hmm.
And but at the end, we are interacting with the same game world or with the same world, and the rules of that world are the same. The problems that get thrown at us are the same.
Right.
And we can still talk about all those problems and all those storylines and all those little problems or choices and stuff like that. So it is a lot of people when they for example, a lot of blind people play Mortal Kombat or Tekken or Street Fighter because they're very audio based and very easy because it's one-on-one. It's not like you have to deal with multiple stuff happening. And like a lot of people, like they're in the beginning, they're like, oh, so how do blind people actually play this game? And then a blind person like comes onto Twitch or something, and then they show it, and then everyone is like, okay, so this is how. Bye. But like, what I would like to see more is people actually trying to bridge the gap of using different senses or using different input methods or output methods, and then saying, actually, did you know that you could do this, or did you know that you could, or how do you handle this, or how do you deal with this problem, or how do you deal with this part of the game?
So you'd like to talk more about the game itself, and like, because you a lot of what you've been talking about today is best practices in coding and how to structure your code well. And we've been focusing entirely on just I guess you would call it the novelty of being able to learn how you interpret this stuff. But you're more interested in talking about the merits of functional programming versus object-oriented stuff and things like that. And that's what our show is usually all about. And so as you're saying this, I have a twinge of guilt for focusing all of this on the blind aspect.
No, but I mean, I think the cool thing is this, like stuff like this is a prologue. So like, because like if you were to throw it out, and then like I actually tried this at the talk I was giving. I was like, oh, by the way, I'm a blind programmer, but I'll tell you more about that after the conference. And then like people through the whole conference were like thinking, how the hell can he program? And they didn't even get what I was talking about. So there, like, I think this is a question that needs answering. How do you interpret this world? How do you use a computer? How do you even program and stuff like that? But like once this base, this foundation is built, thanks to people like you, having episodes like this, it is like the future direction that I would personally want to go, where we start actually thinking about like, okay, so this is a blind developer, this is just a sighted developer, and then how okay, now we're going to talk about this or that, and like that is mostly only possible if that sighted developer knows what I'm talking about, which is, again, as I was saying, thanks to episodes like this, where they're like, okay, so I already have a general idea of how it works, so I won't be peppering you with questions like, how do you even program? So that, because we can't really come into an understanding of each other if we don't know anything about each other.
Right.
So whenever someone asks me, how do you program? I'll just say, hey, here is this YouTube link, go listen.
Right.
So that's a good way to get started. So don't feel that twinge of guilt.
No. I was going to go on to say that there was a twinge of guilt there, but then I realized that now that I know this about what you're really interested in, Elio and I have actually been working on a new format for some episodes, which is more of an open forum where we bring in multiple people and we all discuss these kinds of things, because we've been mostly doing all one-on-one interviews, just Elio, myself, and a guest, and we talk about
two-on-one. You guys just team up on people.
Right, exactly. No, we wouldn't you know?
Right, yeah, it feels really nice, yeah.
But what we really wanted to do was bring in, say, a functional programming expert, somebody who's really into typed languages, somebody who's really into, just experimental languages, and then have us come up with some topics for the evening, and have it sort of be a live, forum where we all just talk about things and we debate them. And the only thing that's really held us back for that is the cat herding part of it, and getting multiple guests to all commit to a certain time. But there's ways of overcoming that, of course. So, I would
plus also not being very subjective about the whole ordeal.
Right.
Like we're like the political debates on TV that I sometimes see on YouTube. They're hilarious to watch, but there's no point in those people just throwing those random ideas out, and that's like usually what you see on the internet, right? People as opposed to explaining things, mostly trying to convey that like functional programming or object-oriented languages are like the best tools that you can have in your tool belt, and you can just apply it for any problem, and then it just happens to work.
Right.
But yeah, I think yeah, the hard part of it is, as you said, getting all these people together and then getting the right questions to get the right set of, because we were talking about debates before the show, so I think you guys are pros at this, of coming up with questions that are non like okay, we're not gonna figure out which of these is the best one, but we're gonna figure out more like how can you solve this problem in that language, like in those types of languages, or like is even this problem made for that kind of language or not, or stuff like
Right.
that.
So
Which I guess
it
you
sounds
guys are
like
good at.
you'd be interested in one of these forums. Would you be interested in us inviting you back to discuss more about best practices and real actual problem solving and things like that?
Yeah, I would be interested. The problem is that there's only so many nights I can stay awake.
Yeah, of course.
So there is a matter of time, like in the sense that like time zone differences. But yeah, if my time zone matches up, I'm definitely interested. And but like
Well,
yeah,
I figured the way we would handle it, because getting our guests to commit to a certain time and a certain date has been traditionally very difficult.
Yes.
But I think if we were to sort of see it as like an event and we put it out there more than a month in advance,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
Something that we can all plan around, and we have advance warning for. I'm hoping that maybe that works out, and then there's only a certain percentage of people where something comes up, and maybe that would work out.
Right. Yeah, I think this is very experimental for me. Like being able staying up so late. I would be really interested to try, and then when I say yes, I will definitely show up. It's not like I would say yes and never show up. But I might say no because I'm like, I need some sleep. Sorry. But
Sure.
but yeah, that is, yes, I would definitely be interested.
Well, maybe we can work out something so those particular episodes we can do it earlier in the day, so this way it's more like something like
Right.
10 at night for you as
Yeah,
opposed to
yeah.
2 in the morning.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's just I like you have had some excellent insights into code matters, even philosophical matters, and it just sounds like you'd be an awesome contributor to one of these conversations.
Thanks.
So
It's great to hear that.
so we have a vast collection of people that we know that would be really good for this, and it just seems to me like it's just a logistical issue, and I'm very certain that the audience would just love to hear everybody discuss something like functional programming or blockchain or decentralization and things like that.
Yeah.
So we'll try and put together something for that, and definitely give you very, very good advance warning, and we'll try and move that earlier in the night.
Right.
So we only have like about 7 minutes left, and so what I was hoping was that you could basically leave us with just some projects that you know of that you think are just particularly fascinating, and why you think that they're fascinating, and why people should, after this show, go and check them out.
Yeah, I actually really like projects that really think about user interfaces, as in like how easy it is for people to use them. One of the things I've been seeing a lot in open source in general is that people code first and think about user experience second. This is again not about just sighted versus blind people. This is like more like, is this actually easy to use, this tool? And like we were talking before the show about Kubernetes and Helm. One thing that I've noticed in that space, in the containerization space, is that the configurations for Kubernetes are so huge that like it's really hard to actually write them by hand. So one project that really I was really surprised with was Helm. That's HELM. They try to make it easier for you to compose these configurations from smaller configurations, which are a lot more manageable. And like I see them as a very good look at user experience. Like, what makes this hard? What makes this job hard? And how can we make it more manageable? And the way they did it was to break this problem into smaller sizes, smaller, what's the word? Like bytes, more manageable bytes. So it's exactly the same way we manage with a lot of algorithms, right? We break them into more manageable chunks, and then we just uh, like make it easier to manage that way. Helm, I think, is a really good example of user experience. And another another thing that I use a lot of Emacs plugins and stuff. Not sure how many of your viewers are Emacs users.
We do have a certain group in here. So we have some Vim users, we have some Emacs users, a lot of Atom and Visual Studio Code users.
Yay.
But they all love anything that allows
Yeah.
them to argue with each other. So
Yeah, yay, Emacs for everyone. Okay, no, but like Emacs. So one thing that I really like in a programming language. Sorry, I'm not gonna say Go is the best language ever, but but one thing that I like in a programming language is its tooling. For its if a language were to have standardized tooling for IDEs. So so for example, Go has that in that, like, you can actually write code that understands your code. So that allows people to actually write code in Go that can do auto completions, or like I don't know, jump to function definitions and all that stuff. What I really love these tools because they make it really easy for everyone to write plugins for their own favorite editor. And I had to do that, for example, with Emacs. And it's super easy to write a tool for your editor to actually go and jump around in your code and try to actually understand it, or like like as Elio was saying, lint the code sometimes even. So we have a lot of these tools for Go. Like there is Guru, there is like GoDef, and there is also, what's the other one? I think there was Oracle. Yeah, Oracle is deprecated now, but like Guru and GoDef are pretty good tools. And yeah, I actually, yeah, I think these are all very user experience based stuff, which is like, I don't know, suddenly this is very important to me now because like I've been always at some point I was working at a company where people were like, yeah, let's write the code now, and then we will find the user interface designer to then lay an interface on top of whatever we built. And I thought that was a great idea. But that, like, working in that company taught me that you need to think about experience in the way it shapes your product. Like thinking about your customers, like the people who are going to use your software, really really makes a massive difference in how you lay out your software, like how you let people interact with it. So it's good to have programming languages that think about ease of use, and like it's good to actually know that, like, at least Go is one of them. Like for example, Rust is also another. So like it's like, yeah, I'm really interested with like programming languages that are worrying about like productivity, which was like, I think, a trend that started with Ruby, right? I think like Ruby was the first one that actually advertised we're gonna make people more productive or stuff like that. But yeah, not sure. I'm not really good at history, but I think that's the first time I saw it.
Yeah, the Ruby language was founded on the principle of making a language that is fun to code in. But
Yeah.
I think that the community definitely saw that there were opportunities there for Ruby to increase productivity via, there's a lot of magic that goes on in Ruby due
Yeah,
to
yeah,
its
yeah, yeah.
ability to dynamically add methods and to do
Yeah. The
mixins
same
and things
stuff
like that.
that I hate in Perl, yes.
Right. So how long did it take for Perl 6 to get released? What was that? Do you remember, Elio?
I don't
Oh,
even.
geez, it was like 20 years. It took
Yeah.
longer than the Doom, the new Doom to come out. It actually did. Doom came out first. Doom,
Wow.
one, yeah. Yeah,
That's
I mean, if you really like, everyone kind of just started ignoring it because there was a lot of other research going on. But there's some really cool ideas in Perl 6. If you really look in there, there's some really good thinking, some really good ideas. It's just that they took so long that everyone else has basically just moved on, found
so
other stuff.
it's the daikatana of code. So they
Yeah.
by the time it came out, its rendering engine was 5 years old and nobody cared anymore.
Yeah, and it wasn't that it was bad. It's just that everyone got used to other stuff and started using other stuff, and it's not as cool as it is. It's not that much better than everything else. It
Right.
competes pretty well. It's just that everyone's already invested in other things, and it's not enough better to displace
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
Right.
So,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry, Parham. Do you have any parting words that you'd like to leave everybody with?
Um. Oh, hard questions. I'm really glad to have been here. And you guys had really interesting questions. I'm really glad that because like whenever I have with someone and I'm like discussing with someone, I'm like, what weird question can they ask that challenges my perception of myself? And you guys have achieved that. And I'm really glad to be here, and I'm actually glad to have been able to talk with people on the other side who are leaving comments that I can't even I can't read them,
yeah.
but it's good that like you guys actually picked out like questions and asked them. So it's actually great to be able to talk to a lot of people through you guys as a medium.
Yeah, actually, so Twitch allows you to replay the chat as you rewatch the
Ah,
old video on demand. And so I think if you have some way of being able to read the chat as it's coming through on a particular part of the web page, then you'll
not
be
on
able to.
Twitch.
Not on
Yeah,
Twitch.
but what I'll do is like I'll just brute force it, like check every few seconds to see if there's a new comment. But yeah, you'll get used to that, like the whole mental toughness thing that I was talking about. Like,
Right.
okay, the solution is not here. Let's brute force. So,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Until you have your fuck this moment and write a
yeah,
script for it, right?
yeah, true.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. That's it for us tonight. Everybody, we're going to definitely have Parham back on here. We're going to try and do the forum shows here in the future. Of course, due to the nature of getting everybody together, it's necessarily something that we're going to have to schedule at least a month in advance. And of course, there's going to be life happens, and some people aren't going to be able to make it. But we're going to try and get that format put together, so this way we can have some wider ranging conversations about code and technology and just philosophy, even maybe. So
Yeah. Speaking of, yeah, I'm hoping that we have you back on because I had a whole bunch of questions we didn't even get to. A little more esoteric, not existential, but about like mental models of how we do and how we could visualize code based on some of the Finland educational system and a whole bunch of other stuff. So hopefully next
Yeah.
time.
Great. I can also leave my email with you guys for you to send me questions for anyone else who's interested.
sure.
You probably have my name in the name of the episode, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And then so my email is me@parhamdoustdar.com. So that's my name all stuck together. .com, but like me at parhamdoustdar.com. So
Okay.
if you two guys or anyone else is interested to reach out, it would I would love to respond, and then to start the conversation. So looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Excellent.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. And that's it for us tonight. Everybody tune back in here next week at Saturday. We are trying to make sure it's on a Saturday now because, oh boy, doing these shows late on a Sunday and then going to work is brutal. So we're going to, I'm saying that as he's up at like 4 a.m. now for you, right? But
yeah.
But anyway, I hope you don't have work tomorrow or today. I hope.
No.
All right, excellent. So you get at least some rest.
Yay.
Everybody tune back in next week. And until then, thank you very much and good night.